CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Paul Barber.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. The rebel Panjshir Valley has fallen, says the Taliban, as the group consolidates its power in Afghanistan.
Vaccines should be a right for all, not a privilege for the few. That's what Italy's health minister tells his G20 counterparts.
Guinea's coup leaders summon government ministers and tell them not to leave the country.
And more than just a motor show, Germany's biggest auto industry event puts its focus onto mobility of the future. The Taliban says it has taken control of the Panjshir Valley, the final area of resistance to the group's rule in Afghanistan. A video showing the Taliban flag flying outside the regional governor's office was posted on social media earlier on Monday.
In Kabul, a Taliban spokesman has said details of the country's new government will be announced any day. CGTN's Norwegia Barkle reports.
Less than a month after they rolled into Kabul, the Taliban say they're now in complete control of Afghanistan. The group's flag symbolically raised in the heart of Panjshir, the last major pocket of resistance in the northeast of the country. Local militia there say the battle is continuing, but following the Taliban's self-declared victory, its spokesman called for unity.
So the people need to know that the Islamic Emirate ended the war, and the war ended. Now we must all work for prosperity and the preservation of freedom. And in this case, the nation is with us, and we see the happiness of the nation, and we still want the cooperation of our nation.
As the world watches, the Taliban are still working out what sort of government they'll put in place. Mujahid said one will be announced soon, but gave no details. The group captured Afghanistan swiftly, but governing it could prove a much tougher task. On the streets of Kabul, there's relative calm and quiet, and the familiar chorus of voices looking for work.
We expect the government to give employment to people, to open factories and business for people. We are searching for work from morning till evening. There are expenditures but hardly any income.
By God, we poor people only want work. All governments are the same to us. It makes no difference to us.
At the city's airports, flights are back up and running. Gone are the scenes of chaos that made this a deadly flashpoint in the West's withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's the Taliban controlling checkpoints now, and checking paperwork is in order.
We're here to maintain peace at the airport. We check the luggage here in order to prevent entry of anything that could pose a danger.
The Taliban are conscious of the appeal of security in a war-torn country, but the economic crisis here risks worsening a possible humanitarian disaster, and landlocked Afghanistan is facing yet another drought. Concerned about the human cost, the UN is hosting a special summit next week. Foreign aid and assistance will be desperately needed, but for now, millions of Afghans are stuck in limbo, waiting to see what happens now the Taliban have taken over. Norwegia Barkle, CGTN.
Live now to Kabul and our correspondent Zamaralai Abasin. So, Zamaralai, the Taliban apparently in control now of the Panjshir Valley. What does this mean for resistance to Taliban rule?
Hello. First of all, we should remind the history of Afghanistan, particularly last 400 years. It was not easy for any group taking power in Kabul and announcing their governments, and then there were always movements from the oppositions militarily and also in various ways. The Taliban are now on the stage and they say they will form the inclusive government in the country, but the resistance force say they are still existing in the country. The resistance force leader, Ahmad Massoud, just announced the resistance and the continuation of the opposition with the Taliban. He also called upon the people and the followers of Ahmad Massoud and the rest areas of the country to uprise against the Taliban, and they will support them in any possible way. Ahmad Massoud, in an audio message about 8 minutes, also claimed that the resistance forces still exist in Panjshir Valley, whether it's uncertain that where he really is. At the same time, there are reports from his comrade Amrullah Saleh, the former vice president, that he has fled the area from Panjshir to Tajikistan, but this is not confirmed by the resistance force. And the Taliban say some of the resistant members have fled the area and they're in search of them. On the other hand, the Taliban emphasized that there is no enmity with anybody, while calling the resistance leaders as enemies at the same time when they were announcing the full-fledged control of Panjshir Valley, calling them the Panjshir Valley as evacuated of the presence of the enemy. So this would be a challenging part for the Taliban, and this is not the resistance in Panjshir. This is the biggest structure of Northern Alliance, and all along the history it's been happening because of the proxies, the intelligence, and other complex issues in Afghanistan. So the Taliban have a lot of challenges in regard to the formation of the government and taking control of the security measures all around the country, but it seems to be much more difficult and challenging for the Taliban as we just see the pages of Afghanistan history.
Yes, certainly a really complex situation. Some details have emerged about the Taliban's policies now that they are in power. They've called for strict gender segregation in schools and universities. What's the response from Afghans likely to be to that? Our apologies, we appear to have lost that line to Kabul and Zamaralai Abasin, but we will see if we can re-establish that.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Qatar addressing the situation in Afghanistan. He's acknowledging the country's efforts in helping Afghan evacuees before heading to Germany for a ministerial meeting. For more, John Terrett joined us now from New York. Good to see you, John. Now, what do we know about this visit?
Hey, Juliet, good to see you again, and Paul as well. I think it's worth pointing out at the top that I'm sitting in our studio overlooking Ground Zero. I mean, this is a live shot, live this morning on this Monday morning. You can see the sun shining down on the memorial. And, of course, this is where the Afghan story began 20 years ago this Saturday. You're going to be hearing a lot more from me and other correspondents as that anniversary gets ever closer. And the visit of Antony Blinken, who is the Secretary of State, and indeed Lloyd Austin, who is the Defense Secretary, comes just a week after the Secretary of State talked about a new chapter in Afghanistan, with the Americans having left and the Taliban now in control. And as you've just been reporting, it comes as one, and I think two major news events have happened in the past 24 hours. Taliban claiming that they've got control of the Panjshir Valley. And here in America, it's been reported this morning that a hostage situation, or a virtual hostage situation, is now taking place in the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, which is in the very north of the country. Associated Press there reporting that there are 6 planes chartered on the ground, ready to take people out, and the Taliban won't let them take off. So the job of these two men, Blinken and Austin, is very, very delicate indeed, and it comes as the US has lost all credibility in the region for pulling out at all, and the way that it pulled out, and it's also now seen generally as retreating from the Middle East. That's the attitude for most people in the region. Now, the pullout itself, of course, is being seen as messy, ham-fisted and badly planned. So Blinken is in Qatar right now. He arrived within the last hour or so. It is not thought that he'll meet the top Taliban brass, many of whom are still there. He will then go on to Germany, to the Ramstein air base, where he'll meet with the German foreign minister and also take part in a UN-sponsored summit on Afghanistan. And Lloyd Austin is also in Qatar, and he will go on to the UAE this week, to Saudi, to Bahrain, and also to Kuwait. Juliet?
John, what do you think might ultimately be achieved?
Well, I told you already that the US has lost an awful lot of credibility in the region, and the reason they're going to Qatar, of course, is because the whole diplomatic infrastructure that just over a week ago was in Kabul is now basically in Doha, Qatar. The first thing they will say, I think, is thank you. Thank you to the people who helped get 120,000 people out from that airport, the biggest airlift, we're told, in history. But the second question is more delicate. What kind of leverage does everybody have now over the Taliban, bearing in mind what I've said about the United States, but other players in the region as well? The US is in a very, very tough spot because it will not recognize the Taliban government if and when it is actually finalized. Now, the Taliban has been there for 3 weeks. They've been talking about getting a government together. They said they would do it once the Panjshir Valley issue was sorted out. Now it has been sorted out. There's a report there may be some kind of government announcement towards the end of the week. We'll see. But remember that US lack of credibility now in the area. I think the first thing that they want to do, apart from trying to get more people out, is to make sure the Kabul airport is fully open. The Qataris have been helping with that over the weekend. Flights, as you've reported, are coming in and out, but I don't think the whole thing is fully functional, and it needs to be fully functional if they are to achieve what they want to achieve with the help of the Taliban, presumably, in power. And the other thing I think that's worth pointing out is that here in America, Joe Biden's poll ratings have plummeted. Now, I won't give you the specific numbers because I don't think it matters for an international audience, but trust me, compared to April when they were pretty much at their highs, they are sharply, sharply lower now. And 2 polls suggest that were the election last November to be rerun today between then President Trump and now President Biden, were that to happen today, Trump would win. Juliet.
Sobering stuff. John Terrett in New York. Ground Zero, thank you.
After years of war, many Afghans are now running out of food. The United Nations has warned that essential supplies could be depleted in a matter of weeks. Earlier, I spoke with Jane Howard of the UN's World Food Programme.
Well, the World Food Programme is managing to deliver quite a lot of food throughout the country because over this last year, even before the political crisis, we've been scaling up the amount of food and nutrition assistance that we're giving in Afghanistan. So actually, it's really quite a large-scale operation that's carrying on, regardless of the turmoil. And this year already, we've reached about 5.8 million people, including some of those newly displaced people, the ones who fled from city to city as the Taliban swept to power, and even people in Kabul. So we are managing to work, but our problem is that it's a big scale up and we need food. We need to truck in food, and that's quite challenging.
And how serious is the situation, and how has it changed since the Taliban takeover?
I think the big serious problem that we're facing is to mount this kind of operation to feed so many people who are really very badly affected. But there's an added challenge with Afghanistan, which is it's so mountainous and the winter is so harsh that you have to have the food in place because all of those little mountain passes get cut off. So you can't reach the people who you really need to reach. And to have the food in place, we need to have the money to be able to buy it. And the World Food Programme, we need about $200 million worth of food just to keep going over the next 6 months. And we need about, I think it's 30,000 tons of wheat flour that we haven't got the money to buy.
And how many people are we talking about? How many people are vulnerable? How many people are you trying to reach?
The latest statistics suggest that 1 in 3 Afghans is going hungry, meaning technically we'd call them food insecure, which means they're struggling from day to day just to get enough food on the table to live a normal life. And that's a lot of people. That's 14 million people. The last 2 out of 3 harvests have failed because of lack of rain. And the food production has been hit terribly this year. It's down. They've lost about 40% of food production. If you add that to the fact that the economic situation is starting to plummet, complications with banks being closed, it's hard to move money around the country. So I do think that we're looking at a possible humanitarian catastrophe unrolling.
And what capacity does the World Food Programme have to meet the needs of the Afghan people? And is that sustainable, or will individual governments have to step in?
Well, the World Food Programme has been in Afghanistan since 1963, and we've worked with different kinds of governments, during conflict, in times of peace. And so we've got the operational infrastructure, if you like, but we rely on governments and individual people to give us the money. We say, this is what we need to do. Please, can you give us the money? There's a lot of attention on Afghanistan now that there wasn't before. If you think of the impact that COVID has had, we had already started to see that that in countries where the poorest of the poor are the ones who get hit most, because they're the ones who have to go out to work every day. And so, you know, it's a complex problem, but at the same time, the hunger needs are quite urgent.
Still to come on CGTN, German Chancellor Angela Merkel says she's profoundly shaken after the sudden death of the country's ambassador to China, just days into his new job in Beijing.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Health ministers from the world's 20 major economies say they are committed to delivering COVID-19 vaccines to the entire world. Talks have just wrapped up in Rome. Officials there agreed that increasing the distribution of vaccines to poorer countries was critical to ending the pandemic. Penelope Liersch has been following the meeting for us. So, Penelope, what was discussed?
Well, a very big focus on vaccines and COVID vaccine inequality around the globe. The World Health Organization at the opening of the summit, and then the head in some ways of the host country, the health minister of Italy, continuing to comment throughout the 2 days of meetings that Western countries, these 20 richest economies in the world, need to be doing much more to close the gap when it comes to getting COVID vaccines to the poorer nations. 18 months into the pandemic, around 5 billion COVID vaccines have been administered, but around 75% of those have been given in around 10 countries, leaving Africa with the lowest vaccine coverage of just 2%. So a political commitment has come out from today to provide vaccines to the whole whole world. At this point, just a political commitment, but we're being told it will follow a financial commitment as well as the sharing of technology and other knowledge to ensure that vaccines can not only be delivered to the countries that need them most, but also created in those countries and produced and supplied there as well. Take a listen to Italian Health Minister Robert Speranza a little while ago talking about the Rome Pact.
The message of the Rome Pact that all the countries have signed is a very clear message. Nobody should be left behind in the vaccination programme. The stronger nations, the G20 countries, must help the more fragile countries in the vaccination campaign. This needs to be done immediately, here and now.
And so, Penny, what happens next?
Well, we are yet to get a financial commitment exactly how much money and when these countries are going to be putting in. But as I mentioned before, it's not just the finances, it's sending these vaccines. WHO has been calling for them for a long time now, calling on nations to step up their commitments and deliver on them to the COVAX program to ensure that 40% of the world's population is vaccinated by the end of the year, as well as providing those licensing agreements and intellectual property to help with the supply and producing vaccines around the globe. We've seen during the summit, Germany has committed to supply 100 million doses of COVID vaccine by the end of the year to international vaccination programs. That's about the equivalent of the number of doses that have been given in that country. So that has come out from the summit as well, but we're waiting on some further pledges and some financial contributions. Interestingly, Italy also announcing they will be giving third dose vaccines to the most vulnerable in their community, following on from similar recommendations being given in the United States and the United Kingdom.
OK, thanks very much, Penny. Penelope Leusch in Budapest.
Well, Dominic Wilkinson is a professor of medical ethics at Oxford University. And I asked him where booster jabs to top up waning immunity fit in to the global vaccine rollout.
Well, I think one of the fundamental questions that we've faced since these vaccines started to become available is, well, who do we give the vaccine to when we can't give it to everyone? Ideally, of course, we do both. We give booster jabs to those whose immunity might be reducing, and we give doses to those who haven't yet started to receive a vaccine. But we don't have that luxury. We never did. We've, from the start, said we need to give the vaccine first to those who are at higher risk. So the question now is, who's at highest risk? Those who might have had 2 jabs but whose immunity may be reducing, or those who've never had a first dose? Well, I think for some, the answer is clear. Those who are at high risk in countries where they haven't had a chance to have any dose of a vaccine, they're at much greater need of a vaccine than somebody who's already had 2 doses.
So what you're saying is you're chiming in with Italy's health minister, who says vaccines should be a right for all, not a privilege for the few. Do you think then that wealthier nations should pause vaccine booster programs so that poorer countries can catch up?
I think they ought to think about their obligations to the wider community. They've been enormously fortunate in countries like the UK to have access early on to large stocks of vaccine. I think it would be extraordinarily selfish to proceed with booster doses at a time when many parts of the world are struggling to have access to first doses. But of course, politically, their priority, their voters are domestic. And so often their first thought will be, well, how do we secure the health of our domestic audience, our voters? Of course, the answer to that is to vaccinate them and not to worry about the rest of the world. But I don't think that's the right ethical answer.
It's almost like this is sort of self-interest versus altruism, like a bit of a conundrum. But, you know, as you say, morality isn't politics, is it?
No, and morality isn't easy. That is the nature of morality. We must make difficult choices. If we choose to prioritise those in our own countries over those overseas, then, as of course, people are able to make that choice, but it doesn't look to be the right choice to be making.
So countries like the United States, the UK, who have got their booster programmes about to hit go on them, do you think they should pause Or do you think it's a question of waiting for more scientific advice, or it's just a morality thing?
So I think this is fundamentally an ethical and not simply a scientific question. I do think we should differentiate. So there might be some individuals who indeed were the highest risk, who were vaccinated very early on, who might now be facing a real risk of becoming unwell again. So if the scientific evidence suggests that those who are at highest risk are now at serious risk of becoming seriously unwell and ending up in hospital or in intensive care, then I think that there may well be a case for prioritizing booster jabs for a subgroup of the population.
Goldman Sachs is planning to list its investment group, Petershill Partners, on the London Stock Exchange. Petershill, which specialises in buying stakes in alternative asset managers, has an expected valuation of above $5 billion. The deal would see the sale of $750 million worth of new shares, plus existing shares, to achieve a free float of at least 25%. The IPO comes amid a boom in the global private equity sector.
JD.com's founder and CEO, Richard Liu, is stepping away from day-to-day operations. The e-commerce titan announced he's switching his focus to long-term strategies and will also spend time mentoring younger management. Liu will retain his chief executive title and his board seat. JD.com will create a new role of president to run the company's daily operations.
Government officials in Guinea have been barred from travel until further notice following Sunday's military coup. They were summoned to a meeting by Special Forces Commander Mamadi Doumbouya, who warned that failure to attend will be considered an act of rebellion. The new military leaders say former ministers will not be subject to witch hunts, but they will have to surrender all government vehicles and can't leave the country without permission. Correspondent Yusuf Bar joins us now from the capital, Conakry. Yusuf, the coup is being condemned by the international community, but welcomed by many there in Guinea. Why is that, and what's the mood where you are?
The mood, thank you very much. The mood where I'm standing now, and the situation is so calm. Life has started changing. It's like people have welcomed the coup plotters. In the meeting today, the speech of the leader, Mamadi Doumbouya, saying that the justice system will be changed, corruption is finished, and so on. He was talking about the differences between the past government and his government that is going to form. And he also advised all ministers to hand over their passports and vehicles and to stay home. And immediately after the meeting, he went direct to the central prison, which most of the Guineans accepted, and released most of the top political prisoners, members of the FMDC who have been fighting against former President Alpha Condé for going for third term. They were all released this afternoon. Immediately from there, the coup leaders drove straight inside Center Conakry. Thousands of people were shouting, "We don't need ECOWAS, we don't need African Union." It's like, I remember I was talking to one of the captains who said the African Union was here when former president was going for third term. They never spoke anything. They never talked about people being killed. We are trying to bring all these people to justice. But as of now, the situation is calm. Life has started going to normal business.
You mentioned the former president. Where is Alpha Condé, and has there been any announcement about what happens next on the political front?
Well, since Alpha Condé was seen yesterday morning before he was captured, up till now, nobody knows about his whereabouts. But according to Mamadi Doumbouya, Alpha Condé is in safe hand, is well, and is having a very good health, and there is nothing going to happen with Alpha Condé. The only thing is people are expecting the Prime Minister and his government of Alpha Condé to resign. That is the expectation people are expecting very soon.
Yusuf Bar in Conakry, many thanks.
Still to come on Global Business Europe. The Spanish city that's hoping to dance its way into the hearts of Chinese tourists.
the EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive the COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, Ricky, last clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
The fight against poverty has suffered a setback.
We are at a turning point in history.
There's a world under great distress and disruption.
But solving the crisis is still possible.
Change is indeed coming.
Join me, Stephen Cole, for a special 1 hour-long show here on CGTN where we speak to some of the world's top leaders and experts standing on the front line of the fight against poverty.
It's a real mistake to think that the future is decided for us. We need dialogue.
We'll spark debate.
The biggest challenge is addressing inequality.
We'll explore the solutions.
This can be done, but it requires everybody working together.
And we'll showcase the success stories to reveal how the cycle of poverty can be broken. Innovation, action, change. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with me, Juliet Mann, and Paul Barber. The headlines again. The rebel Panjshir Valley has fallen, says the Taliban, as the group consolidates power in Afghanistan.
Vaccines should be a right for all, not a privilege for the few. That's what Italy's health minister tells his G20 counterparts.
And Guinea's coup leaders summon government ministers and tell them not to leave the country.
The British Prime Minister has defended his handling of the Afghan crisis. Speaking in Parliament, Boris Johnson vowed to use every economic, political and diplomatic lever to help the Afghans left behind.
He's facing mounting criticism for the chaotic evacuation and a failure to predict the rapid advance of the Taliban. With more, CGTN's Nareed Jabarkal is here with us in the studio. So what more has Boris Johnson said, Nareed?
Yeah, well, almost an hour he was facing fellow lawmakers in Parliament, taking questions on his handling of the crisis, not just Boris Johnson himself, but the man sitting on his right, Dominic Raab, Foreign Secretary, also facing lots of criticism and even calls to resign. The first priority for Boris Johnson was the British nationals left behind. We don't know the exact number, according to Dominic Raab, but it's thought to be in the few hundreds. If you take the extended family members, it's possibly in the low thousands. Here's what he had to say about those people who are still left in Afghanistan and uncertain about how they're going to get out.
So let me say to anyone to whom we've made commitments and who is currently in Afghanistan, We are working urgently with our friends in the region to secure safe passage, and as soon as routes are available, we will do everything possible to help you to reach safety.
Now, in a bid to try and get those people to safety, Dominic Raab went to Qatar and Pakistan last week, trying to get neighbouring countries to help with the evacuation of these remaining people. With regards to Dominic Raab himself, Ian Blackford, the Scottish National Party's leader in Westminster, asked the Prime Minister outright, will he sack him? And he said he wouldn't, although he didn't really say much positively about Dominic Raab as well, which was quite weird. You'd think after the few weeks he's had and the criticism he's faced, the Prime Minister may try to defend him more. And just with regards to the Taliban, there was some messaging there from Boris Johnson as well, saying that if they wanted access to the billions of dollars held internationally in terms of foreign reserves, he's referring to that they would need to be held to account on key issues that the UK sees as important, things like media freedom, things like human rights and women's rights as well.
And Louis, what's the UK's biggest concern right now?
Well, I think the concern is similar to what a lot of capitals are facing, whether it's London, Washington, Berlin. How do you deal with the Taliban? Dominic Raab, on that trip to Qatar, said that they will not recognise the Taliban government at this stage. They don't want to bestow that legitimacy upon the Taliban at the moment. But the Taliban look like they're pushing ahead with plans to form a government, as we've been hearing in the show. So there will need to be some acceptance of that reality on the ground, I think. So that's the main concern for Boris Johnson at the moment. And then also looking at the levers that they had. He mentioned the diplomatic levers, the financial levers. Aside from that money in terms of foreign reserves, there's also the issue of aid. And the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres growing increasingly concerned about the humanitarian situation. A major aid donor summit is being held next week on Monday, and that's going to be key for countries like the UK if they're going to fund what happens next in Afghanistan.
It's a big question, isn't it, in terms of the resources they need right now, but also for the refugee crisis, the humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the focus with Afghanistan and what the scenes we've seen out of Kabul in recent weeks has been on the military aspect of this, the US withdrawing. But this is a country of almost 38 million people and hugely impoverished. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, about 55% of the population, according to the US government, lived on less than $1 a day. That's essentially abject poverty. That figure was closer to about 35% back in 2008. So the situation has actually got worse in the past 10 years. Just in the last few moments, there's been a tweet from the UN's relief chief, Martin Griffiths. He said, today in Afghanistan, I met people who were forced to flee their homes. Half the population now need aid to survive. With the humanitarian and economic crisis deepening further, it's not just the UN who are concerned, but if the Taliban are to govern, I think they'll find out that what comes next is going to be incredibly difficult with the economic and humanitarian crises looming.
It's a huge mountain to climb. Nawid Jabarkal, thank you for the update.
Two prominent opposition activists in Belarus have received lengthy jail terms for their role in last year's anti-government protests. Maria Klesnikova, who led the mass protests, and lawyer Maxim Znak were found guilty of threatening national security and plotting to seize power. They were sentenced to a combined 21 years in prison. The convictions are part of a continuing government crackdown on dissent following the disputed August 2020 election, which many believe was rigged in favour of President Alexander Lukashenko. Chancellor Angela Merkel has paid tribute to Germany's ambassador to China, who died suddenly over the weekend. Jan Hecker had only been in the role for a few days after arriving in Beijing just last month. Trent Murray has more from Berlin.
The news that 54-year-old diplomat Jan Hecker has died has really rattled the Foreign Ministry as well as Chancellor Angela Merkel's office. Before being appointed as ambassador to China, Hecker worked personally for Angela Merkel as a foreign policy advisor. He first started working for Merkel in 2015, advising her throughout the Syrian refugee crisis, as well as helping craft Germany's international security policies. He also regularly travelled alongside the Chancellor during her trips abroad to see other world leaders. In a statement, Merkel said she was profoundly shaken by the news of his death and that she was mourning her highly valued and long-standing advisor. She added that he was a man of deep humanity and outstanding expertise. Hecker arrived in Beijing just last month, but had already submitted his diplomatic credentials and had begun work. The German government is yet to provide any details about the circumstances surrounding his death, saying instead their focus right now is providing support to his family during this difficult time. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
And in Munich, the International Motor Show is taking place this week. The Bavarian city is the new home for what's called the world's largest mobility show. Exhibitions like this have been badly affected by the pandemic, but crowds are able to attend, and this year's event promises to stage the mobility of the future. Our correspondent Ryan Thompson is there in Munich. Ryan, what's different about this year's motor show?
Hi there, Juliet. Well, for starters, it's in Munich. For many, many years that this has been going on, it was in Frankfurt. That was seen as the neutral city among all big three German automakers. They would descend on Frankfurt. And of course, it would, before this, vary between France and Germany, swinging back and forth. There were a lot of questions about COVID-19 and whether this would be able to go ahead because of the conditions surrounding the pandemic. Germany did not want to give up their chance of hosting it because they would have to wait until 2023 for their turn. But it was a very different auto show, a lot of focus on new technology, a lot of focus on how the customers buying these cars have evolved since the pandemic, because of course we've seen a massive demand in people rushing to get their own set of wheels, and many of those people rushing to get electric cars at that.
Ryan, motor shows have traditionally been about showing off the biggest, the most luxurious cars, but the innovation now is more geared towards the climate crisis, isn't it?
Absolutely, Juliet. This is not your auto show from 5 or 10 years ago. There's a lot of factors at change here. Notably, we can talk about the fact that everything is all about EVs. Nobody is looking to the past. Yes, we will eventually evolve as we get away from those traditional engines, but people aren't trying to showcase those. They're trying to showcase how their brands, like Mercedes, like Volkswagen, like BMW, are looking towards the future and how they will be ready when new European Commission rules come into effect in 2025, and they are forced to really cut some of those traditional cylinder engines out of their fleets. On top of that, there's a huge focus on some of these foreign-made vehicles, because the German and French powerhouse automakers that have long dominated these shows, well, they're seeing a lot of competition coming at them from China, which has really been leading the EV race for many, many years now. They are now offering these cars that are luxurious, full of technology, and in many cases offering a much better price point than their European-made counterparts.
Ryan, we have had some pictures, a sneak preview. I know that you've been to the exhibition hall and you've looked around. What is mobility of the future going to look like? Is it a souped-up bike? Is it going to be a futuristic pod? Or is it going to be something that looks rather like what we drive around now, just powered differently?
Me and my cameraman today, Juliet, could not stop talking about how some of these cars of the future, I mean, they truly look like spaceships. And that is always what these auto shows are about, right? Who has the most surprising, energetic vehicle that they can bring to market. But there's a lot that we're looking at here, beyond just EVs, because obviously many find that to be the path forward that is the most reasonable, though there are some challenges, for example, in Europe with making sure that the infrastructure exists to be able to recharge these and really to allow people to move around. But there are questions about vehicles that allow alternative sources of energy, notably hydrogen. That's something that's been very big in the United States, notably in California, really looking at alternative sources. And in the question of hydrogen, Mercedes, for example, thinks that could be a huge way forward in terms of long-term trucking, really being able to get these lorries that go from Eastern Europe to Western Europe over the course of 4 days, allowing them to be able to recharge, refuel quickly, get on the road and get those goods to consumers.
And that gets over that whole big hump of range with electric vehicles. Ryan Thompson, thanks very much.
Beijing is hosting the China International Fair for Trade in Services this week. Spain has sent a delegation from Seville's tourism board in the hope of attracting more people there. With more than 70% of Spain's population now fully vaccinated, the Andalusian city hopes it can encourage more travellers from China and beyond. Rahul Pathak reports.
It's often been called the most famous art form in Spain. Flamenco combines music, dance and singing, and it goes right to the heart of Spanish culture. Its roots are tied firmly with the city of Seville. The city's tourism board is hoping that flamenco, food and its famous UNESCO heritage sites are just some of the attractions that will woo back much-needed tourists.
China has shown a lot of potential in recent years. Maybe Chinese tourists are not so important in terms of hotel stays, but in terms of complementary services, they are extremely important. Places such as flamenco venues, restaurants, guided tours, and cultural visits are showing a huge increase in recent times.
Seville has positioned itself as a destination for quality tourism. This works well with Chinese holidaymakers who tend to favour history and culture over beach holidays.
Chinese tourists come to Seville for its food, museums and churches, flamenco, and learn about the history here.
What I like about Seville, the food, the architecture, the people are very nice. It's just an amazing place to be.
Now, here in Andalusia, in Spain's south, they've traditionally suffered some of the worst unemployment rates in the country. In fact, youth unemployment runs at just around 50%. And with the tourism industry still by far the biggest employer here, Andalusia and the city of Seville desperately need a rejuvenated tourism industry to kickstart their local economy.
We want to be an attractive city, especially for the Chinese market, so they can come and visit here. We have two Chinese tourist profiles: independent travellers that are looking for culture and shopping, and then the ones that come as part of an organised tour.
Tourism bosses are hoping to see a return to pre-pandemic levels that saw over 700,000 travellers per year come from China to Spain. This might be optimistic for the immediate future, but it's certainly in their plans moving forward. Mahal Pathak, CGTN, Seville.
You're watching CGTN. Still to come, how Italian producers are reaping the benefits of exporting fruit and vegetable to China.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back. Chinese space experts are working with a Beijing museum to spark students' interest in the final frontier.
Some kids even heard from special guests in orbit. Sun Tianhuan reports.
China's Space and Technology Museum has opened an experience center to share knowledge about the country's Tiangong space station. The exhibit is attracting space enthusiasts of all ages.
I learned that the core module of Tiangong actually has 3 parts. I thought it was just one.
This is one of the exhibits at the museum, a model of China's Tiangong space station's core module, and the museum says it hopes to help more teenagers get a better understanding of how the space station works and foster great interest in China's manned space programs through experience like this. To satisfy the students' curiosity, the museum invited experts to answer questions. Taikonauts aboard the Tiangong space station even sent their regards by video.
Study science and technology well, so one day you may embark on a journey to the oceans of stars and planets and contribute to mankind's peaceful exploration of space.
It took China nearly 30 years to become a global leader in manned space missions. Space officials say they hope the next generation can continue to explore the universe and its wonders. Sun Tianyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
Italy's biggest fruit and vegetable trade fair has opened, with dozens of Chinese companies also taking part. The exhibition, held in the city of Rimini, coincides with the UN's International Year of Fruit and Vegetables. Hermione Kitson reports.
The kiwi fruit of Cesena is some of the produce taking centre stage at this year's Mac Fruit Fair, an exhibition designed to connect producers, buyers and consumers worldwide.
It's a good instrument to invite the customer from all over the world to see, like we are here now, to see the fruits directly in the field.
Kiwis are Italy's biggest export fruit to China, alongside blood oranges and lemons, and the yellow variety is growing in popularity.
The yellow is gold for the Chinese, and so it's good luck, and they looking for more for gold kiwi than green kiwi.
It's hoped other fruits will soon be added to the list.
Pears and apple are the next one on the table. The terms was for the 2 years ago, but then we had the lockdown and the COVID, so everything frozen again.
This year, 110 companies from 20 provinces in China are also participating in the expo, in a bid to strengthen trade ties between the two countries at a difficult moment.
Italy started exporting kiwis to China in 2008, and in the following 10 years, demand grew significantly. But since the COVID pandemic, shipments have slowed down.
It's a pity because we took a lot of years to build our image of quality and reputation, so we have to recover ground.
Italy has instead focused on the European market, with fruit and vegetable exports up by 8% in the first quarter of 2021. The sector is now only second to wine in terms of economic input, and producers say that despite the challenges, they're confident of a full COVID recovery. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Cesena.
Harmonious cacophony was the theme of the Paralympics closing ceremony, and although the Games are now over, it's hoped there will be a lasting legacy. With accessibility and inclusion in the spotlight, efforts are underway to make sure that the Paralympics torch keeps burning in all areas of everyday life across Japan. Phoebe Amoroso reports from Tokyo.
Japan's national stadium has won praise for its universal design, including multifunctional restrooms and around 500 seats for people in wheelchairs. But as the Paralympics close, many are asking what the event means for accessibility within Japan's everyday infrastructure.
Japan has been moving towards accessibility for a long time. Even when I first came here back in 2000, there were already some preliminary laws to improve accessibility within infrastructure, and that has been improving every year since then. Once the Olympic and Paralympic bid was accepted and it was decided that Tokyo 2020 was going to go ahead, there was definitely an increase in the speed of the change towards accessibility.
Around 96% of major stations in the Tokyo Greater Metropolitan Area are now step-free, and close to 100% have tactile paving.
Beyond the city's infrastructure, many are hoping that parasports also get a boost. Participation rates remain low. According to data from the Japan Sports Agency, around 60% of adults do sports once a week, compared to only 25% of those with a disability.
Opportunities to participate in parasports are limited. There are only around 140 facilities in Japan that can easily be used by those with disabilities. There is also a shortage of parasports instructors and coaches. The Nippon Foundation Para Arena was built according to universal design. It opened in 2018 as a place where athletes could prepare for the Paralympics. But it was built with special permission on restricted land, and its future is uncertain. The Nippon Foundation hopes that they can continue to manage the facility and that it can serve as a model to inspire parasport nationwide.
We can't treat the Paralympics like fireworks, a one-time spectacle that fizzles out quickly.
We have the responsibility to share our expertise in facility management across the country and create an environment with gymnasiums and facilities where people can easily join parasports whenever they feel like doing so.
The Paralympics are helping to drive outreach programs. The Japanese Parasports Association is creating a Japanese version of the IPC's I'm Possible educational program.
We're able to share the value of the Paralympics with children and show that by thinking a bit outside the box, everyone can begin on the same start line. Using the Paralympics as a focus, we can change perceptions, and when those children become adults, they can move forward and change society.
The Paralympics are sparking discussions on inclusion and diversity in Japan. The key now will be to keep the momentum going. Phoebe Amoroso, CGTN, Tokyo.
And before we go, London's best-known clock is showing the world a clean pair of hands again. The clock on the Elizabeth Tower in Westminster, home to the Big Ben bell, has been undergoing restoration since 2017.
The hands have been repainted in their original colour, blue. And they may look good as new, but at least one of them is second-hand. Get it?
The headlines again. The rebel Panjshir Valley has fallen, says the Taliban, as the group consolidates power in Afghanistan. The Taliban spokesman said details of the country's new government will be announced any day.
Vaccines should be a right for all, not a privilege for the few. That's what Italy's health minister has told his G20 counterparts. Officials at the meeting agreed that increasing the distribution of vaccines to poorer countries was critical to ending the pandemic.
The message of the Rome Pact that all the countries have signed is a very clear message. Nobody should be left behind in the vaccination programme. The stronger nations, the G20 countries, must help the more fragile countries in the vaccination campaign. This needs to be done immediately, here and now.
And Guinea's coup leaders summon government ministers and tell them not to leave the country. The new military leaders say former ministers will not be subject to witch hunts, but they will have to surrender all government vehicles.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And we're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.